Welcome to the No More Do More for August. We're going to talk about the Healthspan Project. And Healthspan, for those of you that don't know that term, really is about, rather than the years in your life, it's about the life in your years. And so the idea here is that we want to keep people vital and we want to keep people happy and moving until they take their last breath. And that's one of the things that we take really seriously at Restore, and we're finally able to start to put some science behind the health span in our modalities. Now, what is No More Do More? One of the first things that you need to know is that welcome. We have been doing the No More Do More for over a year now, exclusively for our members at Restore. This month, because it is National Wellness Month, and Steve was so excited to come and talk to our entire community, we have opened it up to everybody in our Restore community. So whether you're a member or not, you are welcome and invited tonight. However, in the future, we are going back to the members only. And so what you can expect when you become a member is really some excellent science-based education. As we'll talk about in just a moment, Restore is taking a really, really unique stance about the evidence base behind all of our therapies. And so every month we connect with industry experts that you can interact with. Unlike a podcast, you can ask questions about and to throughout the entire webinar. And so we want to give you that instant and intimate access with the Rolodex of experts that we have behind all of our therapies. So through these No More Do Mores, you'll get tailored wellness tips. You'll have practical tips out how to blend our therapies together, what you should be doing outside of Restore in order to make sure that you are increasing your health span. And you'll also get some really cool exclusive offers. And we have a pretty awesome giveaway for you tonight, and we have that every month. So let's get to it for tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk about our research at Restore in our Restore Labs hub at our Restore HQ. We're going to look specifically at the Healthspan Project and how this idea of hormesis, or a little bit of stress over time, is going to help to increase that vitality throughout your lifespan. We're going to look at some really, really amazing data that we have generated from our clients, as well as from some of our research subjects over the last year and a half. And then our CEO, Steve Welch, is going to talk to you about his experience at Restore and really put some awesome storytelling about what he has gone through over the last 20 years and how Restore has really helped him and his family. Lastly, as I mentioned, we give away great giveaways on No More Do More. And tonight, you will have 10 people. We usually only have one or two. 10 people will each win a $50 Restore gift card. But here's the trick, is that you got to be present at the end of the webinar in order to receive your gift card. So
good bribe, Rachel. I like it.
Yeah, it's, we got carrots and sticks, man, carrots and sticks. We got to make sure that you're here to receive. If you're not here at the end and you don't hear your name called, you're out of luck. All right, so just our common disclaimer is that the information that you're about to hear tonight is really for educational purposes. I am Dr. Rachele Pojednic, but I am a PhD, not an MD, so I am not a clinician. I am here to educate and to share the science with you. All right, so this is just a little bit about me. I am the Director of Scientific Research and Education at Restore. I run the Restore Labs hub at our HQ. I have done the majority of my work up until I came to Restore about 2 years ago, looking at nutrition, supplementation, physical activity, specifically for muscle physiology, performance, and recovery. And it was awesome when Steve reached out and our co-founder Jim reached out a couple of years ago, and they said, hey, we really want to start putting some data and some good science behind all of our therapies. You study this, you study things that are hard to study. Will you come and work on our team and really start to put some data behind our therapies? And I was like, hell yes, let's do this. My world has been half in academia and half in the wellness and fitness industry. And I love bringing these two worlds together and getting good information to people so they can make good choices. So I was really excited to get this opportunity. And now I'm super excited to get the opportunity to share with our CEO and co-founder, Steve Welch, about all of the amazing work that we have been doing at Restore. So if you don't know Steve, you must, and you
Hello.
will meet him this evening. Steve is our co-founder and current CEO of Restore. He is an established entrepreneur, and I'm excited to hear more about that when he tells his story later on in the hour. He's an active angel investor, and as you will see, a co-author of his new book, Restore: The Life-Changing Power of Right Away Wellness. So, Steve, I'm going to turn this over to you for just a second here, and then we'll start really diving into the Healthspan data. But tell me a little bit about how Restore got started, and also, what about this term hyper wellness? What does it actually mean to you?
Well, so I'm going to save the how Restore got started till a little bit later. I think it'll fit a little bit better into the presentation later. But you know, the reality is, what we do at Restore, your health, it requires consistency and it requires passion. Because the only way to do something consistently is to be passionate about it. So for us, those that are into hyper wellness are consistent and passionately pursuing their own health and energy levels. That's the way you get change. That's the way you get benefit from our services, from your overall health. So that's why we coined that phrase. That's, hyper wellness is a Restore term. It is a trademark of ours, and it really exemplifies so many of our clients, our members that are passionate, and they come in consistently, and that consistency is how they achieve results. So that's what it means to us. And we're excited that we're changing people's lives because we're making it easy to be passionate about your health, and we're giving them an ability to do the things they love to do consistently every day.
That's awesome. And one of the things that I am so passionate and excited about is making sure that we have the data to back up all of our claims, and we do, which is very exciting. So let us dive into the Healthspan data and some of the work that we have been doing at Restore Labs in the past couple of years. So one of the important things that we think about at Restore is making sure that you have access to these incredible modalities, but also making sure that we back them up with good research and good data and good education across our system. So whether you're talking to a nurse practitioner, or you're talking to one of our nurses in the studio, or you're talking to our hyper wellness reps, it is of most paramount importance to us that everybody understands the modalities, they understand the science. And I think really important and unique to Restore is we understand the limitations of our modalities as well. So we can tell you what they do, and we can also tell you perhaps what they don't do, even if you're hearing some hype around in other places. And so this is one of the things that I was so excited about when Steve reached out and said, hey, we want to start this Restore Labs, and we want to really start to look at the data behind these therapies. And one of the things that sort of consistently has come up is that there's a real difference between what we call the absence of evidence and the evidence of absence in the wellness space. Now, you have seen, and I have seen, lots of hype out there about different modalities, whether we're talking about cryotherapy lately, or cold plunges, or IV micronutrients. And you're listening to these podcasts and you're like, is that true? Where's that data coming from? And so one of the things that we think about with the wellness industry is really a lot of the things that we have access to have what we call an absence of evidence, which just means that we don't have the data yet in order to show what is going on in these therapies. That's really different, and this is super important, between the evidence of absence, which means we've studied it over and over and over again, and we see that nothing is changing. We should probably move on, right? And so one of the things that I was really excited about with Restore Labs is, as you will see in Steve and the book that Steve wrote at the end of the webinar here, is you'll see that that book is just full of tons of stories of people that have been coming to Restore, and exactly as Steve said just a moment ago, have felt that their lives were changed because of the therapies and the community that they have found at Restore. And so my job is to understand, okay, if people are experiencing these wonderful things, what's actually going on in the human body that is supporting these changes? And so one of the things that I love to say at Restore is that research is me search. And we use ourselves, we use our willing clients and all of you to be participants in this data. And you will see over the next year or so that there is going to be a lot of opportunity for you to participate in our research to really understand what's going on here so that we can tell you and the people that come into our studios the truth about our modalities. Now, here's one thing that we do know about all of our therapies. Pretty much every single time you come into a Restore, believe it or not, you are actually stressing your body out ever so slightly. We do this by changing temperature, making you very freezing cold in the cryotherapy chamber, or putting you in an infrared sauna where your body increases its temperature, things like compression, where we're physically putting stress on your body. And this is actually really important for physiologic changes. And in fact, this has a name in science. We call it hormesis. You've probably experienced hormesis before in your life if you have ever exercised. You contract your muscles a couple of times, maybe more than a couple of times. And then the next day you're like, what? Why am I so sore? Right? And the reason for that is because you've actually done a little intentional damage to your tissues so that your immune system responds by building up those muscle tissues with new amino acids, with changes in metabolism to make that muscle bigger, stronger, more robust. And so when we think about this idea of hormesis, it is a phenomenon in which a harmful substance gives just enough stimulating benefit for a living organism when that quantity is just right. And so when we look at our therapies, heat, cold, oxygen, light, we see that they are in fact inducing a small amount of stress, just enough, not too much, in order to induce in your body some kind of physiologic reaction. So I'll give you a couple of examples over the next several slides. So if we think about cryotherapy, so what cryotherapy does, and I'm sure many of you have done it, and if you have, go ahead and put it in the chat. How do you feel during the cryotherapy experience? And Steve, you may or may not know this, but we've got an awesome video of you doing cryotherapy later.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart. So the idea with cryotherapy is you go in and we just blast you with a freezing, freezing, freezing cold 3 minutes of intentionally, I think it's 110 degrees negative Fahrenheit in that
Celsius.
chamber.
Whoa. Negative
Oh,
110
sorry.
Celsius.
Sorry, Celsius. Thank you. Thank you. Celsius.
Come on. It's
My
tough.
science,
It's tougher than you're making it out to be.
my science brain just like glitched there. So in that moment, what we do is you have all of these receptors in your skin that sense this freezing cold change in temperature, and it induces these receptors in your skin that create that fight or flight mechanism. And everybody is experiencing this in a really similar way in the chat. It's exhilarating. It's amazing, but crazy, right? So that's that feeling that you are getting. And what we see is what that is doing is actually putting a stress on your body by inhibiting heat loss. You're going to have this major blood vessel contraction. It's actually going to raise your blood pressure for a short period of time. And then by doing that, once you come out and you're like, what? It's amazing. Over the next several minutes, your body essentially overcompensates with a parasympathetic response, which forces your heart rate down. And actually, if you wear an Oura ring, as Steve does, or we all do, you will actually see that your HRV will improve. It will actually get a little bit higher. And one of the really interesting things is this is what we call a hormetic response. And this was a question, many of you put questions into your registration. What's the difference between cryotherapy and cold plunge? The really interesting thing about cryotherapy is that it actually has this compensatory mechanism that works a bit better. Cryotherapy and cold plunge are both going to work by making you cold, but cryotherapy works a bit better in this mechanism, specifically for heart rate and HRV recovery because of that extreme cold temperature. You couldn't put yourself into a negative 110-degree plunge. It would be ice. So in this way, we have this extreme cold that responds on those receptors, and that is what's going to create this change. So you get a really extreme elevation, and then you get a compensatory mechanism that happens that can be beneficial over time. Really similar for infrared sauna. So again, what you'll see is that instead of hypothermia, so reducing your temperature, we are going to induce hyperthermia, increasing your temperature. And by doing that, your body gets very warm. You have a vasodilation effect, opposite from cryotherapy. You increase heart rate, you increase cardiac output, you increase shear stress, you increase blood pressure. If I said this to you on a general day and I said, all these things are going to happen to you, you'd be like, I think I'm probably having a heart attack, right? Actually, not true. Remember, the dose matters. So we increase all of these things. We activate these heat shock proteins. And then once you get out of the chamber, everything cools. You have a compensatory mechanism. All of that vasodilated blood vessels are bringing blood to your tissues. They're bringing the waste away. And that's how these mechanisms work. Red light is also really interesting. So when we look at red light therapy, this is one of our core therapies. This is one that has had me really intrigued since I started working at Restore. Cold and heat were really familiar to me because of the exercise background that I have and the muscle physiology background. But really interesting with red light therapy is, and this goes for infrared sauna a bit as well, is that we're actually using a very specific and targeted wavelength of light to induce a physiologic change in your body. And we call this photobiomodulation. You've probably seen this term before, PBM. And so these red light photoreceptors that are in your body are actually going to induce a change in your mitochondria, forcing them to work a little bit harder, increases that blood flow and vasodilation. And then after that, your body is going to compensate by inducing an immune response, by increasing collagen synthesis. That's where that skin benefit comes from with red light therapy. So again, what we're seeing is that this external stressful stimuli causes a compensatory mechanism in your body, and then it induces change. Now, HBOT is one that I love so much. If you are paying attention to our social media lately, and I know, Steve, we're going to talk about HBOT, Steve, a little bit later. And you'll see, look at that bottom bullet point. I did find a bit of information that you were looking for here. So HBOT's really interesting because if you think about it, of course, we induce a little bit more oxygen in your body when you get into that chamber. You have the oxygen in your nose, and then we pressurize it, and it's going to force extra oxygen in your body. You can probably imagine that's pretty good for things, we're bringing extra oxygen to your tissues. They're able to utilize it appropriately. But here's the really interesting thing. We actually, by pressing extra oxygen into your bloodstream, normally your bloodstream is 100% saturated on your red blood cells. The way that HBOT works is it actually dissolves more oxygen into the serum of your blood, which your body actually recognizes as momentarily problematic. They're like, why is this happening? Why is there extra oxygen around? And what it does is it actually induces, again, with these repeat changes in oxygen and the compensatory mechanism of blowing that oxygen out once you remove yourself from the chamber, it induces this hormetic effect of increased immune response, increased tissue reformation, because it has this sort of healing effect on the compensatory back end of that over oxygen exposure. So one of the things that we see is that, if you have some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder, this can be really helpful for your brain. If you have tissue injuries, which if you saw our social media, I was talking about my knee surgery. This was really helpful in my recovery. Really interesting and fun fact, if you have erectile dysfunction, it seems to be quite beneficial for that, most likely because it helps to vasodilate, which is, for the record, exactly how Viagra and Cialis work. And so also what we see is that it could potentially over time, and I'm going to put a little exclamation point on this because Steve's going to come back to it, actually might help to improve aerobic performance by increasing oxygen carrying capacity over time. So all of these compensatory mechanisms are critically important. And the way that we like to think about it at Restore is a really simple formula. A little bit of stimulus plus the recovery results in adaptation. But you got to have both, right? So you've got to have that little bit of stress, and then you need to pull back. And that recovery mechanism is what's going to induce and allow your body to have these cellular adaptations. So I'm going to finish it off here to show you a little bit of our data and what we've been measuring in people to actually see how these effects are happening. So if you go to our website now, you can go to restore.com/restore labs. And what you'll see is all of the work that we have been doing to really quantify these mechanisms that I've been talking about. And so a couple of months ago, we actually had our first paper accepted for the peer-reviewed literature. So if you are a scientist, you understand this experience is slow and brutal, and it is really hard to get papers published. And when I first started, Steve was like, so when can we get this published? Like next month? And I was like, it'll be a little while. So
Patience is not my strength.
So we do have a lag. And I think that's something that everybody should be aware of between the science and what we're seeing in these therapies as they're sort of coming out into the world. It takes time to study. In this case, we were studying people for 6 months. On the next study that I'm going to show you, it's 9 months. So it literally takes almost a year just to get the data in order to start to analyze it and understand what's going on. But we have, as I mentioned, about 1.5 years worth of data. So we are starting to be able to publish our work. And so in our very first publication, which was called the Healthspan Project, we followed people for 6 months, and it looked very much like our membership. So people came in and they used all of the therapies at Restore. So they did the compression, they did red light therapy, they did infrared sauna, they did cryotherapy, they did HBOT, they had their IV micronutrients. And what we were looking at is understanding biometrics. So these are things that you measure from the outside in. So Steve, you can flash your Aura ring again. We use those Aura rings. We looked at biomarkers, which is in the blood. So these are blood physiologic changes. And then we also looked at body composition. So one of the things that you might be noticing in your restores, if you have performance medicine that's rolling out in, what are we at, about half of our studios now?
About half the studios have it now, yep.
Good. So we'll be rolling out to the rest. About half of our studios have performance medicine, and you will start to see an in-body machine that you can stand on and really start to understand how much adipose tissue you have, how much skeletal muscle you have, and why that is so important. As we know, muscle physiologist over here, muscle is definitely the tissue of longevity, and we want to increase and maintain our muscle as long as we can. So it's way better to understand that than just the number on the scale. So when we look at our health span data, we looked across the spectrum, we saw if you consistently over 6 months' time participated in all of our therapies together, we saw improvements in LDL cholesterol. So this is 10 milligrams per deciliter. It's pretty significant change. We saw a reduction in what we call high sensitivity CRP. That's a molecule that indicates systemic inflammation. We saw improvements in body composition. So 3.29 kilograms is about 10 pounds worth of change over the 6-month period. And this is super important to double tap on. We saw body fat mass decrease, not skeletal muscle. So we are losing the right weight, the adipose tissue, the fat, and not the lean tissue. And then finally, we saw a 35% increase in HRV. Now, why is this interesting? 2 reasons. Number one, if you wear an Aura ring or one of the other monitors that checks your HRV, you've probably used it for recovery from athletics or something like that. What it was actually designed for was to indicate early stress on the heart, to show whether or not, in 2 cases, it was used very early on, there were fetal abnormalities. So they used to actually check HRV in pregnant women to understand how the fetus was developing. And then they also were looking at people that had high risk for cardiovascular disease. So in the case of the Healthspan data, the #1 killer of Americans right now is heart disease. So if we can start to detect that and change it and address it early, that's really important, in addition to being able to recover from your basketball game. So I'm going to give you a sneak peek, and then I'm going to turn this over to Steve of some data that we call in review in science. And what this means is that it's undergoing peer review right now. It has been through 2 revisions, and I am very optimistic that it will be published sooner rather than later. And what's super exciting about this data is we were looking specifically at whole body cryotherapy on both HRV, so looking at that cardiovascular risk, as well as some of our biomarkers. Now, I have an outstanding video that I want to show to you. Steve, you want to tee this up a little bit before I
Well, I
hit
didn't
the
know.
button?
Now I know why you guys asked for it. So, yeah. So I didn't know we were gonna have a picture of me in my underwear here, but that's all right. So we are the leaders in cryotherapy. Just to be blunt, we have over 230 locations around the country, and in part of being leaders, you need to continue to innovate. And in the cryo space, specifically, we're focused on constantly developing new, better machines. And this is literally the first session in the United States using our One Cools product, which is in beta trial. So it's only in one studio right now, but it is a smaller unit designed to fit in homes, designed to sit in smaller areas. And you'll see here, it is cold. You can go ahead and play it.
Right.
So you can see nice and tight features.
Holy shit, that's cool. Oh my God. Okay. Cold ass test. Fine, you guys feel good.
So that was one of the lead engineers there. Pretty proud of the work he'd done getting that first prototype up. It was they made it the coldest it could be at the highest wind speed setting. So they were trying to torture me. It worked pretty well. I can do cryo a lot. You'll see later, and even that was a cold session for me. So hopefully you'll start seeing those come across the United States. It is a great product, and we're excited to have it in the market.
Awesome. I probably should have prepared people for the expletive too, but it's all right. We're all adults here.
I am not known for having clean language. That's if I can get through the rest of this talk, that's the worst thing you hear from me. That'll be considered a win.
All right, so I'm going to wrap it up here with our actual data from our cryotherapy. This is in peer review, as I mentioned, so hopefully it will be published shortly. But what you can see, and I think this is super important, and Steve mentioned this right in the very beginning, is that consistency is key. So when we look at the Healthspan data, we see consistent use over 6 months results in all of these beneficial outcomes. And we're seeing exactly the same thing when we look at cryotherapy in isolation. And so when we look at the left, what we see is the actual change over time. And this is 9 months worth of follow-up data. So we were tracking people for almost a full year. And what we see is that if they participate in cryotherapy on average 6 times a month, so this is about 1 or 2 times a week, what we see, again, you can look at this marker of high sensitivity CRP. This is that inflammation marker. And then what we also see at the same time is that fasting glucose, this metabolic marker, is going down at the same time. Now, likely, these two things are related. We know that higher blood glucose can lead to inflammation. But if we can use something like cryotherapy to address both, then we see some real benefit here. Now, one other thing that I want to tell you about with this is that we know that cryotherapy, and if you've experienced it, and you all talked about it in the chat just a moment ago, is really awesome one time, right? You go in and you're like, oh, I feel amazing. You play your like pump up song, you come out and you swear a little and you do a little dance and you feel awesome. And we also know that one singular cryotherapy session can be super beneficial for pain, like acute pain, like, oh, my back is really killing me right now, or I've got this shoulder pain. It can be really helpful to reduce that pain right now. But what we're seeing in this data is that if you want to actually reduce systemic inflammation, this is the inflammation that's all over your body, then it takes some time. And the really interesting nuance of this data is it took about 30 days for people to start to see this significant reduction in inflammation. Once they reduced that inflammation, the more cryotherapy they did, the lower their inflammation took. But it took about a month in order for people to start to see that systemic inflammation to come down. Why is this important? We're going to say it over and over and over again. Consistency is key. Hormesis is about tiny stressors over time continuously You would not expect to get a gigantic bicep if you went to the gym one time. You might get a little pump in the mirror, but you're not going to end up with a big, huge arm or big, huge muscles if you aren't consistent with your exercise. That's how hormesis works. And this is what our data is really showing day after day. So consistency is truly key in order to make sure that you're getting the benefit of all of these therapies. So Steve, I'm going to turn this over to you because I know you have, I can give the numbers and I can give the data, but you have just like the story behind all of Restore, and we are all dying to hear it.
Awesome. Well, Rachel, first of all, that was an amazing presentation. I'm reading the comments, and those were words that were said by multiple people. We are focused on bringing science to these therapies, to making sure people can make the right decisions. And you can see why Rachel's heading that project. She is an amazing talent. You can follow her on LinkedIn. You can follow her on the Restore. She posts a lot. She provides information. And what you see from that presentation she just gave, this is complex. It's hard. It's hard to understand. And she does an amazing job of taking the complex and making it simple. So Rachel, thank you for not only the presentation, but everything you're doing to bring data to life and help us live better lives. So thank you so much.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure. And I'm absolutely honored to be able to work alongside of you in that endeavor.
Awesome. So I'm probably more excited to deliver this presentation than any I've ever given in my life. And the reason for that is kind of twofold. Number one, it's the intersection of two things I'm extremely passionate about. I am passionate about Restore, like everybody else in the building I'm standing in today. We wake up every day. We know what we're doing is having an impact on people's lives. And that's a great feeling to be able to go to work every day and know that. And two, I'm actually very passionate about my own health. And you'll see why as I get into my story. It's pretty clear that my own journey is pretty similar to most Americans. I'll be blunt here. You're going to see this. I have made some very bad life decisions when it came to health over a very long period of time. But I know I've also started to make good decisions. And I can see in the data, it's not just me. I know I can feel it, but it's one thing to be able to feel it. It's another to be able to, like Rachel just did there, point the data that shows my body is performing better, even though I'm getting older. And my story is that. And it starts, my story, like so many people, it starts with my family. Starts with my family because they're inspiration, but also I share genetics with a lot of these people. I'm influenced by their lifestyle choices. And specifically, we're going to start out my story by focusing on the gentleman to my right. That is my father. That is a picture from last year. He was 76 years old. As we go through this presentation, you'll realize why that's a really good picture as we go here. But, he influenced me like all parents influence their kids. And I saw his life choices, and he made a lot of very good life choices. Now, I'm going to take you back in Jack's life. His name's Jack Welch. He's not for those that are of my generation, he was not the Jack Welch of GE. He was the Jack Welch of DuPont. He actually rose to become a vice president. This is a picture of him at age 34. At 34, the little kid in my mom's lap, that's me. My father was incredibly disciplined. He worked out religiously. He would get up, he fell in love. He grew up his entire life playing baseball, but fell in love with tennis in his early 30s and played tennis every day he could. Because he was disciplined, because he had 3 young kids, because he had a very demanding job, he would get up at 5 a.m. and go play tennis, often indoors in the winter, outdoors in the summer. But it was what kept him engaged and he was passionate about. Now, he also had an incredibly stressful job, traveled a lot. There were times in life where he was traveling close to 40%, maybe 50% of the time. And while he was very disciplined in many areas, he loved his brands. He loved his Diet Dr. Pepper. He loved his KFC and he loved his Burger King, probably in that order. That's a pretty good estimation. And he drank a lot of Dr. Pepper. He ate KFC like it was his job, and Burger King very often as well. Now, he continued to stay engaged. And this is him at 54. He was again, a lifetime learner. So he went and got his pilot's license in his 50s. He fished. Again, he continued to play tennis. By the time he was in his 50s, he was probably playing tennis every day. And if you would have looked at this individual, you would have said this person is the pinnacle of health. However, he still liked his brands. He liked his Diet Dr. Pepper. And again, he was fooled by this idea that it was diet. He liked his KFC. He liked his Burger King. It's 67. This is a picture of him at 67. And I wish I had a better one that showed this, but he rose, I think at the peak, he was number 7 in seniors tennis. He playing tennis every day. You would have looked at him. He lives in, or used to live in my neighborhood. I would have people come up to me every day when he was in his late 60s saying, I saw your father play tennis. It was amazing. He looks like he's in his 30s. And, a lot of them were pretty insulting. He looks better than you look. And at 67, he did. But he still liked his brands. He liked them every day. Diet Dr. Pepper, KFC, and Burger King. Now, unfortunately, it is 16, right before his 70th birthday at 69, I got a call from him in the summer. And he said, Steve, I'm just getting old. He's like, I can't continue to play tennis every day. I'm winded easier. It stinks. I'm getting old. That went on for a little bit. And then he went and saw the doctor. He said to the doctor, I think something's wrong. Something's not right here. The doctors sent him home multiple times, said, Jack, this is what happens. You've been an amazing athlete. You've lived, you're playing tennis in your 70s. You can't play tennis every day. Those were words that were literally said to him. At one point, he literally would not leave the doctor's office. He said, doctor, there is something wrong here. I am not leaving until we figure out what it is. He was at a cardiologist. The cardiologist put him on a stress test, same cardiologist he had been to multiple times. They later said, well, we think you may have some blockage in one of the arteries. We're going to send you to the hospital. They're going to probably put in a stent, maybe two. I was there with my mom that day. The cardiologist came out that afternoon. He was 70 years old and said, we don't need stents here. We couldn't do anything. He has 5 blockages, 4 of which were over 90% occlusion. And later that night, he went into emergency bypass surgery. Okay, this is the person, again, you looked at days earlier. He looked like he was in health, or certainly months earlier. Now, the good news is, that surgery went quite well. And in fact, at 72, he will tell you he felt better than he did at 65 because he made some life changes. And it turns out, even though he didn't look it on the outside, on the inside, he was starting to have problems way before that happened. Now, the reason I'm using this as part of my story is I was 42 when this happened. Okay. I'm 48 now. Now, when I followed a pretty similar life as my father. At 25, I started my first company. I did whatever it took to get customers. If a client wanted to go out until 2:00 in the morning drinking, I was going to go out with a client until 2:00 in the morning drinking. If a client wanted me to be in Indianapolis tomorrow and it was 8:00 at night the night before, I was on a plane that next morning, whatever it took. And I lived a very stressful life. In fact, I bought a company when I was 25. It was in Saratoga, New York. At the time, I was in Philadelphia. The company was not particularly well run. I needed to be there a lot. I didn't have a lot of money. So I would drive to Saratoga, New York once a week. I would spend the night in my car. For those who don't know, Saratoga, New York in this winter is very cold. So this is the lifestyle I lived. And while I did not like my father's brands, I had my own brands that I was in love with. I drank a lot of Pepsi, often probably 6 a day. I love Dunkin' Donuts. I ate it every morning. Every single morning I had donuts, and every afternoon I would eat McDonald's. I lived and again, you would have looked at me, I looked pretty good. At 29, I married the love of my life. Fortunately for me, she was much healthier than I and had a healthier lifestyle. Not only did she exercise probably more than me, she was a very good cook and focused on health food. But while she had an influence, throughout my 30s, I still loved Pepsi. I still loved Dunkin' Donuts, and I still loved my McDonald's. Now, at about 39, that's a picture of me when I was 41, but about 39, I did start to feel a difference. All of a sudden, I was very active during those times. Like I said, I worked a lot, but I played soccer, I played basketball, I ran, I did a lot. But all of a sudden, I started to feel it. I started to have less energy. I started to get sore. I get injured more easily when I play basketball. So I started playing less basketball. And at that point in time, I won't get into my kind of entrepreneurial record, but I'd had some pretty significant successes. And I had a lot of resources to kind of go out, hire doctors and look at a lot of different things. And at that time, I started to realize something that was really impactful. I knew more at that time. I knew more about the soil in my garden than I did my own health. I literally had a report that said, your garden has this alkalinity and everything you see there. I knew that. At the time, I knew nothing about my own health. I knew more about the pool in my backyard than I did about my own body. I knew more about my car's, performance than I did about my own body. I knew more I got an email once a month from Nest that would say, here's the energy you're using in the consumer house. Here are the good things and the bad things than I did about my own body. So I sent out a mission to change that. I wanted to understand that. Because the reality is, if you would have looked at me at 41, I looked fine. I was 155 pounds. I had 77 pounds of skeletal muscle. I had 17 pounds, if you will, of fat. Now, that was part of it. And that's looking good on the outside is one thing. But this is what I looked like on the inside. My LDL was 161. That's the bad cholesterol. That is very high. My HDL, which is the good cholesterol, was low. My blood pressure for somebody of that weight was extremely high. My HbA1c, basically, your pre-diabetic indicator, was getting close to being pre-diabetic. And I was having inflammation, and I was very deficient in things like vitamin B, vitamin D, glutathione, and iron. So while I looked fine on the outside, the reality was on the inside, I had some real problems. And you just heard my story about my father. The reality is I'm likely to have heart issues. In fact, it was my father's event that really forced me to change. I got all of that information. I saw I had bad things going on in my body in January of the year my father had his heart issue in October. So I saw that, and I tried to make changes. And I reduced the amount of caffeine I drank and soda a little bit. I tried to become a vegetarian. It didn't stick. I tried to change my eating habits. They were minor improvements. It was not until I had to stand up in front of my father, who was in the hospital, who looked healthy, that I realized I was on the same path that he was. So while I didn't stick to become a vegetarian, and by the way, I'm going to start out with this. Every person is different. What I have realized over the last 7 years in this journey is that we're all different. We all have different risks. My risk, I am way more susceptible to heart disease than probably most people on this call. There are people on this call that are going to be way more susceptible to cancer than I am. So it is looking and understanding where your risks are and trying to build things in a system that works for you. And that system is absolutely different for everybody. I tried to become a vegetarian. Absolutely no way could I do it. First of all, I couldn't get the protein. I saw my energy level go down. Today, I've been a pescatarian for 6 years. And for me, that absolutely works. I don't eat a single shred of meat other than a fish, or I should say red meat or white meat. And the reason for that, it's not that I think having one piece of meat is going to cause any problems, but I live and I'm very disciplined. And if I set rules for myself, I tend to stick to those rules. So I said, I'm not going to eat any meat. And for me, it's actually been, that part's been pretty easy, with the exception of bacon. When I smell bacon, holy crap, it is hard to turn away bacon. It just smells so good. But I get through in that regard. Getting rid of sodas was way harder. It was way harder. There's an addictiveness to caffeine, to a Pepsi, to a Coke, whatever it is. But for the last 6 years, 7 years, I have only drank water and tea. I will not drink anything else. Again, the reason is I think many of these other drinks are good for you, but I set these rules. These are the things I'm going to do. Now, I know, and like many people, we know the right things to do. The right things to do, I should be in the gym lifting, 3 days a week. I can't do it. I'm going to tell you right now, that doesn't work for me. I can't stick with it. But there are physical things that I am passionate about, that I want to do every day when I can. So I focused on those things. I love running. I love running because it's therapeutic. I kiteboard, and you'll see some pictures here in a second. I kiteboard anytime the winds will allow it. I wing foil anytime the winds will allow it. I surf anytime I can get where the waves work. So I focused on those things, and I just added 2 things that I knew they're torture. Like, I do hot yoga once a week. It's torture. I hate it, but I know it works. And I know it helps with the muscle mass. And I do 100 push-ups a night. It's an easy way. I can listen to a podcast. It is small, it is minor. This is not saying this is what's right for everybody, but I do think everybody needs to have a plan, and that plan needs to engage in what you can do to make sure you keep moving. Make sure you're motivated doing the things you love doing. I do custom drips now. Every 2 weeks, I get a drip. My drips are specifically designed for what I'm deficient in. I sat down with the RN in the studio. I said, here's the lifestyle I'm living. Here's what my labs say. And we design custom drips, and one drip won't do it. So that's why I alternate back and forth to two drips a week. And anytime I feel the very slightest discomfort, and this is the thing that had really, in hindsight, changed the most for me, was when I was 40 years old, those pains were keeping me from doing the things I love doing. But now, anytime it's the slightest discomfort, which is probably 4 times a month, it's not excessive, I'll go do cryotherapy. and I'll get rid of those aches and pains. So I am like Rachel discussed. For me, I do it because I get the immediate impact. However, I now know, and you will see in my data, by doing that, I'm actually reducing my inflammation, not just at that time, but throughout everything I'm doing. And I started doing hyperbaric training. Besides heart disease, the other thing that if my heart survives, what my genetics will tell you is that my mind will go way before my body. And some of the early data, and I'm not a doctor, some of the early data shows hyperbarics really do improve cognitive function and help with that over the long haul. So I started doing that. And the reason that's important is when I look at what has changed in my life, I think that has had a huge impact on my outcomes. So when we age, no matter what anybody tells you, usually things get worse. Okay. So when you look at where I am today versus I 7 years ago, you should assume that anybody over 7 years, their biomarkers, their physical traits are going to get worse when you're in your 40s. Okay. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. But if you look, I think my mass and body mass, that means very little other than the fact I'm 5 pounds lighter, but I have the same muscle mass. Okay. Again, that for me is not a big driver. However, you look, my LDL is down by over 40 points. Now, I will tell you, at the time when I was doing this test, doctors insisted on putting me on blood thinners for reducing cholesterol. I made the conscious choice. Again, everybody's different. Doesn't mean it was the right choice. But I didn't want to be on those drugs for 50 years. There may be a point in time where I'm on those drugs, but starting on that at 40 seemed too early. I changed the life decisions. I changed my diet. I made sure I had the micronutrients that I needed. And you can see that is a very big move without medication. My HDL is up, my blood pressure, and actually this is my last reading. That's actually even a little bit higher than it normally is. The one area where I actually did see a massive improvement that has actually reverted back a little bit is on my HbA1c. I was at 5.5. I reduced that a couple of years ago. I was down to about 5.2. I've come back up. I do have a sweet tooth. And you'll notice when I talk about things I limited, I still eat sugar. I still eat cake because I do also think you need to have some things in life you really enjoy. And for me, it's worth the little bit. I have cake every now and then. But again, it's about designing the system that's right for you. My CRP, which we talked about, which is basically your inflammation biomarker, is down by 75%. Okay, that's extraordinarily low. And again, I think that is because I'm doing cryo consistently. And I'm no longer deficient, even though, again, 7 years later, excuse me, most people over time, as you get older, you are deficient in things. The only thing I'm deficient in is iron. And ironically, that is the only thing I take a supplement, oral supplement. Everything else I'm getting is, for the most part, in the IV form or shot form. I also take CoQ10, which helps in a lot of ways. So the other part of what I think is important and what we're really trying to do at Restore is to bring that science is wearables. And I'm going to focus on the Oura Ring, but I think there are a lot of wearables out there that work. I think if you want to change behavior, and guys, I didn't give you my background, but I am an engineer. You probably have figured that out already. But as an engineer, you can't change what you don't measure. And I fundamentally believe that's true in business. I also think it's extraordinarily true in our own personal lives. So I wear an Oura Ring. I look at it frequently, and I'm not going to show you every insight, but I'm going to show you just one kind of thing that I think is important for people to see. So the blue here that you see is my total burn. In essence, it's the total amount I'm moving in a day. I'm exercising. It takes another way to look at it is total steps taken. If I look at total walking equivalent, they'd all basically look the same. That's the blue line. The black line there that you see is heart rate variability. And Rachel already touched on why this is so important. You can see those things move in sync. For me, and I'm going to show you the exceptions here, but when I exercise, when I move more, my heart rate variability gets better. So if you look here, if I look at my data, there's a couple of things. My happy place, I make no bones about it. I live on a boat. I historically have lived on a boat about 2 months a year. The blue, I kind of shaded there. That's when I live on the boat. I'm more active when I live on the boat. I kiteboard any day I can. I what's called spearfish any day I can. And you can see my activity goes up. And it's probably a little bit because it's my happy place. My heart rate variability goes up very drastically. I don't show it here, but my resting heart rate comes down 3 or 4 beats per minute as well. So this is how you drive change. It's seeing what works and what doesn't. I have friends that have been on Oura. The most important thing that has helped them see is drinking alcohol, especially late at night, is impacts their sleep, impacts their resting heart rate. So many of them, it's helped them reduce alcohol intake. Many of them, it has reduced or changed when that alcohol intake happens. Now, you'll notice except when I'm on the boat, my exercise is pretty constant. Yet you can see here, my heart rate variability came way down at the beginning of this year. I'll be blunt, I was stressed. And I see in my Aura Ring does tell me when I'm stressed. So seeing that helped me make a really important life decision. My family was going to go on the boat for a month. There was an argument to say, hey, I shouldn't be doing that given what's going on at work. Seeing that data enabled me to say, I am going to go on the boat. I'm going to work from the boat. And that was the right decision because you can see, number one, I got most things done on the boat, but also you can see my recovery of my heart rate variability. You'd see it in my resting heart rate all happen. But none of this, I truly believe this, I don't make those changes without seeing that data. That's what it is, being able to envision that data that allows me to see the path forward. So as I said, these are pictures for me this summer, and I'm going to share because I'm proud of a couple of things here. Number one, I do feel better than I did 7 years ago. I feel better than I did when I ran my first marathon when I was 24 years old. In fact, my last marathon time was better than my first marathon time 20 years later. This picture, I spearfish. And for those who know, that spearfish does not mean I shoot with a gun. I use what's called a pole spear. The reason I say that is that sport, you have to be deep. The deeper you're underwater, the longer you're underwater, the better you are at it. The more you're going to eat. When I'm on the boat, I will only basically eat what I catch. So what I have seen, and I think it's because the last couple of years I've really introduced the hyperbaric, my ability to get deeper, lower, longer has gone through the roof. In fact, I don't sit there and measure this, but I wear a Apple Watch, the Ultra, and when I get done a day, it tells you, hey, here's how many feet you were under, here's how far you were, here's how deep you were, how long. You see all your numbers. It kind of just feeds it to you. And I'm now down where I'm at 38 feet making shots for 45 seconds. I'm down at 30 feet for over a minute free diving. And those are things that would have been absolutely unimaginable to me, certainly 20 years ago, even 10 years ago when I started. So again, it is not to say this is the path. Everybody, you have to find what motivates you. And you got to find your community. I use this picture. My wife also kiteboards, my kids kiteboard. So it is that community of people that are like-minded, that share the same things that you're passionate about, is how you engage and make change in your lives. It is finding that spot, finding whatever it is. And guys, it is not athletics for everybody. Some people it's gardening. I learned to make sushi. Some people it's making sushi. It's whatever it is, find that passion, whatever motivates you, because that is how you're going to drive change in your life. So number one, I fundamentally believe this, and you have to invest. It's investing energy, time, and money in understanding your health. You have to make those same investments today, not tomorrow. I will tell you, I think the best thing that happened to me was my father's actual health issues. I think I would have followed his exact same path. I would have issues later in life. I think I'm on a different path. I love my father. You're going to see here. He has turned out great. He's still in great health. But I think at 70, I am unlikely to have the heart issues that he had because I learned from his mistakes. You got to focus on things you love to motivate you, and you got to surround yourself, if at all possible, with people that share those same motivations. It's terrible to say this, but if you live in a house where people smoke, you're way more likely to smoke. So if you live in a house where people are healthy, you're way more likely to be healthy. So find those like-minded people that share your goals, your incentives, and talk them through. Be a part of a community. One of the things that absolutely works at Restore is it's a community. It's a community of like-minded people. I will go in the studio any day and I can have a conversation with anybody about, hey, this is what I'm focused on. This is why I'm focused. And then build parameters that work for you. This is important. Like this one size fits all for health, it doesn't work. It's bullshit. We all know it's bullshit, but that's what the healthcare system has put upon us. It is time now to take a look and say, what matters to me? I am an N of one. What should I measure? What should I care about? And then hold yourself accountable to those things. So That is my own story. Thank you for indulging me. I am so passionate about it because I actually think my own story fits into everything we're trying to deliver here from a science standpoint. I feel better today than I did 10 years ago. I think arguably I feel better than I did 20 years ago. And it is because of choices that I am making and investments we are making here at Restore. So thank you for indulging me. We have a lot of great questions I saw pop up. Rachel, I think you're going to moderate, and we're here to answer questions as long as people want to talk.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Steve, for sharing your story. I think you were so kind to share all of the wonderful things that were coming through the chat when I was talking. So I will reciprocate. People are so grateful for you sharing your family and your story with them, and really being inspired by your journey at Restore, alongside of all of us that are on this journey together. So we will wrap it up here. Go ahead and put your questions that we have in the chat. If you want to learn more from Steve, give him a follow on LinkedIn. So he's at Live Free or Die, which I sent you an email earlier, Steve, like, you're a Philly guy. This is New Hampshire. Like, I'm New England born and bred. We will fight for New England.
The Granite State gets a lot right.
All right, so go ahead and put your questions in the chat. We do have some promos to just get into your mind as you start to think about coming into the studio. If you're a member, if you're not a member, it is National Wellness Month here at Restore. And so we're excited to offer you a lot of ways that you can try out our therapies. So if you are not a member and you want to come in, we have a really awesome offer for you on the next slide. If you're currently a member or a client of Restore and you're not a member yet, there's a lot of different ways that you can access our therapies in unique ways this month. So we're looking at things like getting more IV drip ingredients for the prices that we have. So 33 for 30, 110 for 100. And as Steve mentioned, you can sort of mix and match and make custom drips for yourself based upon your biomarkers, which you can also test at the studio. If you're interested in NAD, we've got a really great 5-pack for the price of a 4-pack. We've got 25% off core services. If you are a member and you refer a friend and they become a member, you get $100 off the next month.
Rachel, I'm going to stop you there. Everybody on this call, you have to. You don't get a choice. Part of being on this call, you have to go find somebody you love, somebody you care about, somebody you know needs to start doing these things, and you take them to Restore. And that is your job. It is incumbent upon you to help the people you love in life. And this is a great example of we're incentivizing you to help the people you love in your life.
And I saw, just to double tap on that too, I saw a lot of people in the chat being like, oh, I brought my husband in and it really helped him, or I brought my partner in, or I brought my niece in and it really helped. So share these stories as you are experiencing them and bring people into the studios. We also have our Neve Skin, which is a facial treatment, a 5-pack. You can get 1 session free. If you are new to Restore, so welcome. As I mentioned in the very beginning, this No More Do More is typically for members only, but if you are not a member yet, we have an awesome way for you to get involved. So if you're new to Restore and you sign up for either our Level Up or our Elevate membership, which are 2 entry-level memberships, you actually get 4 additional services. You get an IM shot, you get an additional base IV, you can try out the HBot, and you get a skin health consult with one of our estheticians. One of my favorite No More Do Mores that we ever did was about how skin health is so important for your overall health.
Rachel, what's the largest organ in the human body?
It is the skin, as it turns out.
Epidermis.
Yeah.
Oh,
It
okay.
turns out. So we have, we've got you covered from literal head to toe, making sure that all of your preventive and complementary needs are met. And so if you're not a member, take a screenshot of this QR code and bring it to your local Restore. So I'm going to get to a couple of questions here. They've been coming in fast and furious. So a question that we get a lot is about ordering different therapies together. Now, there are a couple of right answers to this, but also, as you tapped into, Steve, a lot of it is really based upon your needs and personalization and working with the hyper wellness reps and the nurses to figure that out. Can you talk a little bit more about the way that you put therapies together?
Yeah, and this is not scientific. This is a good example of non-science. So please don't accept this as medical advice. Um, I do both PBM and cryo. In the summer, I do PBM and then cryo because I want to walk out cold. In the winter, I do cryo and then PBM because I want to walk out warm. So that's the sequence matters to me in that regard, but it's a very selfish way or a very myopic way of looking at it. I have a routine. The one area that I should do more of, I don't, is the sauna. Everything else I have pretty part of my routine. So I put it on my calendar. So I think the other thing that I make, work is, it's on the calendar that I'm going to go get my drip these days. I book it in advance. It is my forcing function. I don't know that I'm the most qualified person. We have, many medical doctors, many RNs in the studio. I think they have a much better feel and can give recommendations for how you combine services. But my own plan was built by, their recommendations. It was not something I came out on my own. It was their recommendations. It was me looking at what works, what amount of time I could commit to. One of the reasons I love cryo so much is it's quick. A sauna session is a little bit longer. Time is a premium for me. So I think it's working with your person, your RN in the studio to figure out what works best for you.
Yeah. One of the things I just really want to highlight here that you said is because there is actually a right answer to red light therapy and cryotherapy, which I'll get to in a second. But one of the things that I just really want to highlight is super unique to Restore. When you walk in, you have medical professionals all around you, right? So it's not walking into a studio where, you don't have somebody that you can't consult with and ask questions. As I mentioned, as the director of scientific research and education, making sure that our staff knows everything about all of these therapies is super important to us. And you also get the clinical guidance that goes along with it. It's one of the things that makes you Restore so unique is having this medical oversight. And as far as the data goes for red light therapy and cryotherapy, the right answer here, and we're splitting hairs ever so slightly, is actually your summer version is red light therapy before cryotherapy. But this is super important, and the nurses would definitely send me nasty grams if I didn't say this. You have to give yourself time to cool off and stop sweating before you get in the cryo chamber, because you cannot get in the the chamber wet. So if you're going to go and do red light first and then cryo, this was for athletic performance and recovery. That's what this data was looking at. Just make sure you give yourself some time to dry off.
Rachel, I was really just hedging by giving two answers.
Okay, so a couple of questions about IV drips. How do you pick your IVs? You said that you picked it based on your biomarkers. Can you tell everybody a little bit more about how that process works?
Yeah, that's great. So, in most states and in this country, we have a product called a micronutrient analysis. So I've done that blood testing. I continue to do that blood testing. Excuse me. And then from that, I can see what I'm deficient in. In addition, I sit down with the NP and I say, hey, here's what my exercise routine looks like. Here's what my lifestyle looks like. And from that, they made recommendations. Hey, you're a marathon runner at times. When I'm actually running marathons, I actually do my drip changes a little bit. So it is very, tailored towards what my activity looks like at that time and what I know I'm deficient in. Excuse me.
I can carry on from this while you're taking a quick drink. So one of the things to think about here when you are going into the studio, I love this. I was at one of the Philly studios working with the group that's up there. Huge shout out to Andy Ayer's team up in Philly. And one of the things that I love that one of his nurses said to a client that was sitting next to me is, feelings are good, but facts are better. And so as the scientist, my heart just absolutely exploded. And what she meant was, you probably feel really good after your drip. Maybe you got some magnesium and you're nice and relaxed, or you've got your B12 and you're feeling a little bit more up. But what she meant was, go get your biomarkers tested, figure out what your body uniquely needs. And from there, what we can think about is developing that customized drip to address these deficiencies that you might have. Because one of the first things that we think about is, of course we want to, use these ingredients to help boost whatever part of our day-to-day that we're trying to sort of enhance. But nutritional, supplement scientist over here, what I would say is the first thing you want to do is address any deficiencies. You want to bring yourself to level set And then from there, you can start to think about adding on. So checking those biomarkers and getting a peek under the hood of what's going on in your body is really key. So the questions about the specific drip, can you talk a little bit about your ingredients and how they make you feel?
Yeah, so I get mine change, so it's hard to say it's exactly the same every time. So I get vitamin B in everything I do. I'm vitamin B deficient without it by a good bit. I also get a CoQ10 shot at least every month. I try to do it every 2 weeks. CoQ10, Rachel, you can certainly talk about the benefits of CoQ10. I think that's part of the reason I've seen some improvements in other areas. And then, I get the, Myers cocktail, and everything again, every 2 weeks. The data on that, from my perspective, is very compelling. It's long lived. This is not something that's kind of new. It's been around for a long time, and the data on it's really compelling. So those are the things that are pretty consistent. Other than that, it does change over time as I see my micronutrients and my performance change in different areas.
Yeah, it's a really good point that you're saying too, and it kind of comes to this idea of consistency is key, is that keeping track of those biomarkers a couple of times per year is probably a really good idea, because things are going to change seasonally. They're going to change if you change your diet, if you're doing something new as far as exercise is concerned. So keeping an eye on that over time, like you would, monitor your, as you mentioned, your hemoglobin A1C to see if that's changing. It's really important to look at those micronutrients over time.
Yeah, and diet, I will tell you, is I've seen this in my own data. Diet changes what you need in your drips by a lot.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, I think those are the major questions that we had. Everybody's curious, very curious about your journey, Steve. So thank you so much for sharing. And one of the things that I would just love to throw out to everybody is Steve and Jim, our co-founders here at Restore, wrote a really beautiful book about the stories that people experienced at Restore, and then the science that backs up our therapies. So if you really liked this format of understanding what does the science say and how are people experiencing our therapies, this book is a really beautiful way for you to dive a little bit deeper into some of the experiences that some of our clients have. Do you want to say anything else about your book, Steve?
No, it is a quick read. It is designed to be to bring the science to life, but also to tell it through fun stories and fun stories, most of which are our clients. So it was a extremely fun project in that regard. I do want to hit, one person asked, well, what do I do if answers haven't been, or if I haven't gotten answers to my questions? Please email Discovery. It's discoverynight@restore.com. Education is core to what we're trying to bring to our members. So if you have questions that we can help with, we want to be there. That is what motivates us. That gets us excited. So please do. If we didn't answer a question, please email us. We're going to do our best to get an answer for you.
And we will answer that a couple of different ways through our blogs. You can always check our blog, but this also informs, your questions inform what we talk about on the No More Do More nights and the guests that we reach out to. So keep sending us your questions, because you essentially have a say in the information that we bring to you. So interact with us and let us know what you want to learn about. On that note, next month, our No More Do More goes back to members only, and you are not going to want to miss this one. This is a No More Do More with a dear friend and colleague of mine. Her name is Simi Foster. We are actually doing a research collaboration with her at Restore to study symptoms of long COVID. Simi is a super, super cool MD, PhD researcher at MGH, Mass General Hospital, and Harvard Medical School in Boston. And she runs the coolest lab. Steve, you will love this. It's called the Hot and Cool Lab. It's so awesome.
Cool.
Yeah. And so what she studies is hot and cold therapy. So extreme hot, like infrared sauna, extreme cold, like cryotherapy, on things like immunity. And specifically, she's looking at dysautonomia symptoms. So that is the dysregulation of the central nervous system that happens with patients after they have long COVID. And I saw a question in the chat, and forgive me for not being able to get to it, but this goes a lot to some research that we're working on too, to understand vasomotor symptoms for people that are in peri and postmenopause as well. And we think a lot of these mechanisms are related. So stay tuned for that. We will have more guests on to talk about that. But next month, we're going to talk about immunity. We're going to talk about hot therapies. We're going to talk about cold therapies and how they can help with things like long COVID. Now I have winners. So if you are still here, you will win a $50 gift card. So give us a high five in the chat if you are here. So I'm going to read off your names. So Chris Renz, Olivia Willow, Shadow Reinben, Robert Jones, Zayla Angie, Sarah Jerry, Mark Hoffmeister, Destiny Kearney, Susan Linda, and Catherine Young. If you heard your name, give us a high five in the chat. You have a $50 gift card coming your way. No need to put your email in. We have it and through your registration, and we will send this to you. You'll be in contact from our incredible marketing department. And I need to give our marketing department just a huge shout out for setting up No More Do Mores every month and always making just absolutely beautiful, easy to read and understand ways for us to communicate our therapies and our science to you. So huge shout out to the marketing team. And Restore.
Do more.
Steve, I'm gonna let you do it. I'm gonna let you
All
do
right.
it.
So this is they should know a little background on this for those that don't know. I'm from Penn State. At Penn State, in the football games, we say, we are, and then the other part says Penn State. So in our own internal company, if somebody says restore, your respond is do more. So restore.
Do more.
Thanks, guys. Have a great night, everyone.